Cleaning lady answers call in Latin. Seconds later runs to quit her job. Margaret Wilson nearly dropped her bucket of water when the yellow office phone in the dean's office rang for the third time in a row. She wasn't supposed to answer it, but the incessant noise was disrupting her concentration as she polished the mahogany furniture. When she lifted the receiver to her ear and heard that voice speaking flawless Latin, her heart raced and her legs trembled so much she had to lean on the desk. The words Veritas vos liberabit echoed in her mind like a whisper from a past she had buried 15 years ago. "Hello? Who is this?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from years of silence. "Professor Margaret Helen Wilson, specialist in classical literature at the University of California, Berkeley. I know you remember me." The world around her seemed to vanish. No one had called her by that name in so long that she had nearly forgotten who she once was. Her hands grew clammy as she gripped the phone tightly. "I think you've got the wrong person. I'm just the cleaning lady here," she lied, but her shaky voice betrayed the truth. "Dr. Wilson, my name is Richard Baker. I was your advisee during my master's between 2007 and 2009. Do you remember the thesis on Ovid's influences in contemporary American literature?" Margaret closed her eyes and, for a moment, saw herself back in that study room, surrounded by ancient books, mentoring brilliant young minds who admired her knowledge. Richard had been one of her best students, always inquisitive and dedicated. "Richard?" The name escaped her lips like a breath. "Yes, Professor. I need to speak with you urgently. I've discovered something about what happened in 2010, about the plagiarism case that destroyed your career." The mention of that year made Margaret lean against the wall, her legs threatening to give way. The year her life had completely fallen apart, when she was accused of plagiarizing a foreign colleague's research. The year she lost everything. "I don't want to talk about this," she said quickly, ready to hang up. "Professor, wait. I know who actually committed the plagiarism. And that person is here at this university, holding the very position that should have been yours." The silence that followed was heavy as lead. Margaret looked around the lavish office she cleaned every day, its shelves filled with books she knew better than anyone else in the institution. "What do you mean?" "Professor August Thompson, the current dean of this university, was the one who stole your research. I have proof, Professor. Emails, documents, everything. He didn't just destroy your life, he built his career on your work." The name August Thompson made Margaret's blood run cold. He had been just an associate professor when she was expelled from the university. Now to learn he had risen to the top using her own research was like a punch to the gut. "How did you find this out?" "I've been working as an intellectual property lawyer. A recent case led me to investigate old academic frauds, and your name came up. When I dug deeper, I found inconsistencies in the articles Professor Thompson published right after your expulsion." Margaret felt as if she were in a dream. After 15 years of scrubbing the floors of the same university that had publicly humiliated her, someone was finally telling her she was innocent. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. "Richard, I don't know what to say. It's been so long. Professor, I know this must be hard, but you deserve justice. And it's not just about you. I've discovered Professor Thompson has done this to other researchers over the years. He has a pattern of stealing work from more vulnerable people." Margaret sank heavily into the dean's chair, something she had never done in 15 years of work. Her calloused fingers from years of cleaning lightly brushed the polished surface of the mahogany desk. "What do you want from me?" "A meeting, that's all. To show you the evidence and discuss what to do. You have the right to see what I've uncovered." "I can't. I have a daughter, Richard. She's 17 and knows nothing about my past. To her, I've always just been a cleaner. If all this comes out..." "Professor, I understand your concerns, but think about your daughter. Don't you think she deserves to know her mother is one of the country's leading experts in classical literature?" Richard's question echoed in Margaret's mind as she remembered all the times Emily had asked about the university where she worked, showing interest in the books she saw on the shelves during her rare visits to her mother's workplace. "I need to think. Of course. But Professor, there's more. Professor Thompson is planning to publish a new book at the end of the year. From what I've gathered, he's once again using research that isn't his, including some of your unpublished work. That's impossible. All my manuscripts were stored on your personal computer and in the university archives, right? Professor Thompson had access to everything. As part of the committee that investigated your case, he had full access to your personal files. The revelation hit her like a bucket of cold water. Margaret had always wondered how someone could have accessed the specific details of her unpublished research. Now it all made sense. Where can we meet? Campus Cafe, tomorrow at 3 in the afternoon. Back table, near the window. How will I recognize you? I'll have a brown folder and Ovid's Metamorphoses on the table. You remember, it was your favorite reference work. Margaret smiled for the first time in a long while. Richard really had been an excellent student, recalling every detail of her lectures. See you tomorrow, then. Professor, one last thing. Please don't mention our conversation to anyone yet, especially not to anyone in the university administration. After hanging up, Margaret stood still for several minutes, staring at the yellow phone as if it were a magical object that had changed her life in mere moments. Her eyes wandered over the office she knew by heart, every inch, every book, every document. How many times had she cleaned those shelves, secretly dreaming of flipping through those books that had once been her passion? How many times had she dusted the diplomas and certificates on the wall, remembering her own awards now stored in a box at the top of her closet at home? The sound of the door opening snapped her back to reality. Mrs. Constance, the cleaning supervisor, walked in with a stern look. Margaret, what are you doing sitting there? And who were you talking to on the phone? You know cleaning staff aren't allowed to answer administration phones. I'm sorry, Mrs. Constance. The phone wouldn't stop ringing, and it was distracting me from my work. It was just a wrong number. The older woman eyed her suspiciously. Constance Miller had worked at the university for over 30 years and had a sharp eye for lies. A wrong number that lasted 15 minutes. Margaret, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost. I'm fine. Just a little tired. Can I finish cleaning this office and leave? Go ahead. But tomorrow I expect you to be more focused. The dean complains when things aren't perfect. After Constance left, Margaret tried to get back to work, but her hands were shaking so much she nearly dropped the cleaning spray on the floor. Every object in that office now seemed to carry a new meaning. The leather armchair where August Thompson sat every day, the computer where he wrote his fraudulent articles, the fake diplomas hanging on the wall. For the rest of the afternoon, she could barely concentrate. When she got home to the small apartment she shared with her daughter Emily in the midtown neighborhood of San Francisco, she found the teenager studying at the kitchen table. "Hi, Mom, how was work today?" Emily looked up from her books and immediately noticed the strange expression on her mother's face. She was a smart and observant girl, always at the top of her class, dreaming of studying literature at the same university where her mother worked. "It was fine, sweetheart. What are you studying there?" "Literature. We're covering the Latin classics, Ovid specifically. It's fascinating how he influenced world literature, isn't it?" Margaret nearly choked on the water she was drinking. The coincidence was too unsettling to ignore. You like these classical authors?" "Love them. I wish I could read them in the original Latin. It must be amazing to understand exactly what they wrote without relying on translations. My teacher said the university where you work has one of the best classical text libraries in the country." "That's true," Margaret replied softly, remembering the hours she'd spent in that library, translating ancient manuscripts and uncovering connections no one had noticed before. "Mom, have you ever flipped through any of those books while cleaning the library?" Emily's innocent question felt like a stab. How could she explain to her daughter that she hadn't just flipped through those books, but had spent 15 years of her life studying them in depth? "Sometimes I take a quick look," she lied. "It must be incredible to work surrounded by so much knowledge, even if it's just to clean. I'd want to stop and read all the time." That night, Margaret barely slept. She stared at the bedroom ceiling, replaying her conversation with Richard and watching Emily asleep in the bed beside her. They'd shared the room ever since moving to that apartment after Margaret got the job at the university. Before that, they'd gone through some very hard years. After being expelled from the university, Margaret sank into deep depression and was unemployed for nearly 2 years. Emily was only 2 at the time and didn't understand why her mother cried so much or why they'd lost the big house they used to live in. The cleaning job at the university was a bitter irony of fate. When she heard about the opening, Margaret almost didn't apply. The thought of cleaning the same halls where she'd once been respected as a professor seemed like an unbearable humiliation. But Emily needed food, a roof over her head, clothes for school. So Margaret swallowed her pride, hid her education on her resume, and presented herself as a simple woman in need of work. To her surprise, no one recognized her. 15 years later, she was still just Margaret from housekeeping to everyone at the university. The next morning, Margaret woke earlier than usual. She made breakfast for Emily and watched her daughter get ready for school. The teenager had the same expressive eyes as her mother, but carried a hopeful light Margaret had lost long ago. "Mum, are you okay? You look worried." "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just thinking about some things at work." "What kind of things? Don't tell me they're cutting cleaning staff. You work so hard there." "It's nothing like that, honey. Go to school, don't worry about me." After Emily left, Margaret was alone in the apartment, staring at the clock on the wall. There were still 5 hours until her meeting with Richard, but she was already as nervous as if she were about to take a final exam. She opened the closet and deep inside, behind old clothes, found a dusty cardboard box. Inside were all her diplomas, certificates, awards, and some manuscripts she had managed to save. She picked up her PhD diploma and ran her fingers over the name Margaret Helen Wilson, Doctor of Classical Literature, as if it were the first time she had seen those words. There was a photo of her at graduation, at 32 years old, holding Emily in her arms. The little girl was just 1 year old, wearing a white dress. Margaret was radiant, with the graduation cap on her head and a smile of someone who had conquered the world. "How things have changed," she murmured to herself. She put everything back and got ready for work. On the bus ride to the university, she watched the students coming and going from campus, young people full of dreams and plans, just as she had once been. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. That day's work was torture. Every time Margaret passed near the cafeteria, her heart raced. At 2:30, she asked Mrs. Constance for a break, claiming she had a personal matter to attend to. "Don't take too long, Margaret. We still have the entire 3rd floor to clean." "Don't worry, I'll be back in an hour." Margaret entered the cafeteria exactly at 3 o'clock. The place was bustling, with students chatting and professors holding informal meetings. She looked for the table in the back, near the window, and saw a man around 40 years old, with brown hair streaked with grey, wearing a simple suit. On the table, exactly as promised, was the book Metamorphoses and a brown folder. Richard looked up and recognized her immediately, even in her simple work clothes and hair tied in a practical bun. He stood up and waved discreetly. Margaret approached the table with hesitant steps. It felt strange to be in that place, not to clean, but to sit down like a normal person. "Professor Wilson," Richard stood and extended his hand. "It's an honor to see you again." "Richard," she shook his hand, noticing how her own hands, calloused from hard work, contrasted with his. "You've grown so much." 15 years make a difference," he smiled warmly. "Please sit. Can I get you some coffee?" "Just water, thank you." Once they were settled, Richard opened the brown folder and pulled out a stack of organized documents. "Professor, before I show you the evidence, I want you to know I never believed the accusations against you. Your students knew your character and integrity. Thank you, Richard. That means a lot to me. I'll show everything in chronological order. Here are the emails exchanged between Professor Thompson and a colleague from Oxford University in January 2010. He showed her the printed pages. 2 weeks before you were accused of plagiarism." Margaret took the documents and began to read. Her eyes widened as she saw August Thompson discussing specific details of her research with the Portuguese scholar, including passages she hadn't yet published. How did you get these emails? The Portuguese professor passed away last year. His family donated his entire academic archive to the university, including electronic correspondence. When I was researching similar cases, I found these exchanges. But this proves August had access to my work before it was even published. Exactly. And there's more. Here's the research the Portuguese professor published, accusing you of plagiarism. Richard showed another document. Compare it with Professor Thompson's earlier emails. Margaret read with growing attention. It was clear that August had sent his complete research to the Portuguese colleague, who published it first, to create the false impression that she was the plagiarist. But why would August do this to me? We were colleagues, we worked in the same department. Professor, you were about to be promoted to chair of the classical literature department, correct? Yes, the process was underway. And who took that position after you were expelled? The answer hit her like a punch to the gut. Margaret remembered perfectly. August Thompson had been named department chair just 1 month after her forced departure from the university. He planned it all, she murmured, feeling nauseous. There's more evidence. Here are other papers published by Professor Thompson in the following 5 years. I managed to trace the origins of at least 3 of them. All were inspired by research from professors he helped expel or who left the university under controversial circumstances. Richard showed an even thicker folder with detailed documents. Margaret realized she wasn't alone. August had done this to others over the years. Richard, this is terrifying. How many careers has he destroyed? From what I've uncovered, at least 6 cases similar to yours in the last 15 years. Always the same pattern. Talented professors with groundbreaking research who were suddenly accused of academic misconduct. And all these professors. Most left academia entirely. Some moved cities. Others changed careers. One professor who researched medieval literature now works as a librarian at a public school in a small town. Another, an expert in ancient philosophy, became a freelance translator. Margaret felt a mix of anger and sadness, knowing she wasn't the only victim. At the same time, there was a strange relief in discovering her intuition had been right. She truly was innocent. What do you plan to do with this information? That depends on you, Professor. I can take it to the university board, the press, or the district attorney. But I wanted your permission first. And what would happen to August? At the very least, he'd be fired and stripped of all fraudulently obtained titles. Depending on how the case proceeds, there could be criminal consequences too. Margaret fell silent for a few minutes, absorbing everything she'd learned. She looked around the cafe, seeing students and professors going about their normal lives, unaware that one of the biggest academic frauds in the university's history was being uncovered right there. Richard, I need to think about this. It's a lot to process at once. Of course, Professor, but there's something else. Professor Thompson is planning to retire at the end of the year with full honors. The university is organizing a grand ceremony to celebrate his brilliant academic career. When? December. And he's publishing a commemorative book compiling his major contributions to classical literature. Professor, from what I've verified, at least 40% of that book is based on stolen work. The information was the final straw. The thought of August being honored for a career built on lies and ruined lives was unbearable. What do I need to do? First, we need more evidence. Do you still have any of your original research materials, manuscripts, notes, anything that proves the work was yours? I have some manuscripts at home. Not much, but maybe enough. Perfect. I also need you to think of other people who can testify in your favor. Former colleagues, students you've mentored, anyone who can confirm your competence and integrity. Most of my colleagues distanced themselves after the scandal. I don't know if I'd have the courage to reach out to them. I understand, but you have to remember they were also deceived. Once they learn the truth, I'm sure they'll want to help. Richard placed the documents back in the folder and looked directly into Margaret's eyes. Professor, I know this is hard. I know it's reopening wounds you might prefer to keep closed. But think of your daughter. Think of the other professors who were wronged. Think of the students being deceived right now. You're right, Margaret sighed. I can't let this go unnoticed. Then can we schedule another meeting for more detailed planning? All right, but Richard, I need to ask you something. I can't involve my daughter in this yet. She knows nothing about my academic past. Of course, Professor. We'll handle everything discreetly. They set another meeting for the following week and said their goodbyes. Margaret returned to work, but her mind was entirely focused on what she had discovered. For the rest of the afternoon, every time she saw a professor in the hallways, she wondered if they knew the truth about August Thompson. When she got home that night, Emily was studying at the kitchen table again. "Hi, Mom. How was work today?" "It was different," Margaret replied, taking off her shoes. "Different how?" "Just some unexpected things. Nothing important." Emily studied her mother closely. There was something different in her posture, in her expression, an energy she hadn't seen in a long time. "Mum, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart. Why did you never want to study? I mean, working at the university, seeing all those professors and students, didn't it ever make you want to take a course?" The question caught Margaret off guard. She sat in the chair beside her daughter and carefully considered her answer. "Why do you ask?" "I don't know. Sometimes I get the feeling you know way more than you let on. When you help me with homework, especially literature, you always have insights even my teachers don't." Margaret's heart raced. Emily had always been perceptive, but she had never questioned her directly about this. "Maybe I've picked up a few things over the years," she replied evasively. "Mom, have you read the Latin classics in the original?" "Why do you ask?" "Because yesterday, when you were helping me with my paper on Ovid, you corrected a translation in the textbook, and you were right, I checked online afterward." Margaret realized she had made a mistake. In a moment of distraction, she had let her true knowledge slip. "Must have been a lucky guess," she lied. "Mom," Emily closed her book and looked straight at her. "You're lying to me, and it's not the first time I've noticed." The direct confrontation left Margaret speechless. She had always known this conversation would come someday, just not this soon. "Emily, there are things from the past that are complicated to explain." "What kind of things?" "Things that happened before you were born, things that changed our lives." "Mom, I'm 17. I'm not a child anymore. If there's something important about our family, about you, I have the right to know." Margaret looked at her daughter and saw a determination in her eyes that reminded her of herself in her youth. Emily had truly grown up. She deserved at least part of the truth. "All right, but promise you'll let me explain everything before jumping to conclusions." "I promise." Margaret took a deep breath and began to share a condensed version of her story. She spoke about studying literature, about being a professor, about losing her job over a misunderstanding. She didn't go into details about the plagiarism or about August Thompson, but she said enough for Emily to understand why they had gone through financial difficulties. "You were a college professor?" Emily asked, her eyes wide. "I was, for 15 years. At the same university where you work now?" "Yes." "And people know about this?" "No. And I'd prefer it stays that way." Emily fell silent for a few minutes, processing the information. "Mom, this explains so much, your hints about literature, the way you talk about certain subjects. Do you have a PhD?" "I do." "And you're working as a janitor with a PhD?" "Emily, when we lost everything, I needed to take any job to support you. The janitor position came up and I took it. Over time, I got used to it." "But that's not fair. You should be teaching, advising students, not cleaning classrooms." "Life isn't always fair, dear. Sometimes we have to accept our circumstances and move forward." "No, Mom. This is wrong. You have to do something to get your position back." Her daughter's vehemence struck Margaret deeply. It was exactly what Richard had said that afternoon. She deserved justice. "Maybe you're right," she said softly. "Of course I am, Mom. You're one of the smartest people I know. I always knew there was something special about you, but I never imagined this." That night, Margaret barely slept again. But this time, it wasn't just anxiety. There was a strange sense of relief in finally sharing part of her truth with Emily. The next morning, as she got ready for work, she looked at herself in the mirror. For 15 years, she had grown accustomed to seeing only a janitor reflected there. Today, for the first time in a long while, she caught a glimpse of the professor she had once been. During her shift that day, Margaret noticed details that had previously escaped her. While cleaning the library, she spotted several books she had used in her own research. Some even had margin notes she recognized from her former colleagues. In the faculty lounge, while emptying the trash, she overheard two professors discussing a recent article by August Thompson. They were praising its originality and depth of analysis. "It's amazing how August always finds new angles to approach the classics," one said. "True. He has a knack for connecting ancient texts with contemporary issues that few can match," the other agreed. Margaret clenched her fists. Those innovative connections were exactly the kind of approach she had developed in her own research. Hearing other professors praise her work, now credited to August, was almost unbearable. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us just starting out. Now, back to the story. That afternoon, during her lunch break, Margaret did something she hadn't done in 15 years. She entered the library not to clean, but to research. She looked up August Thompson's recent articles and began comparing them to her own memories and notes. The librarian, Mrs. Rose, a woman in her 60s who had worked there for decades, noticed the janitor's unusual interest in academic books. "Margaret, are you studying something?" "Just curiosity, Mrs. Rose. Sometimes I wonder what the professors research." "I see. You know, I've always thought you had a different way of looking at books, not like the other cleaning staff. You treat them with special care." The comment made Margaret smile. Rose had always been an observant woman. "I've always loved reading," she replied diplomatically. "If you'd like, I can show you how to use the computer search system. That way you can find specific topics that interest you." "Thank you, but I don't want to interrupt your work." "Don't worry about it. It's always nice to see someone interested in learning. You know, about 15 years ago, we had a professor here who was passionate about the same authors you were just looking at." Margaret nearly choked. "Really?" "Yes, Professor Margaret Wilson. A brilliant woman, an expert in classical literature. It's a shame she left the university so abruptly." "What happened to her?" "There was a plagiarism scandal. I never really believed that story, to be honest. She didn't seem like the kind of person who would do something like that." "Why do you say that?" "Because I saw how she worked. She'd spend hours here in the library, consulting original sources, taking meticulous notes. That's not the behavior of someone who copies others' work." Margaret felt her eyes well up. It was comforting to know that at least one person had doubted the accusations against her. "Where is she now?" "I don't know. After she left, we never heard from her again. I hope she's doing well wherever she is." "I'm sure she is," Margaret murmured. That afternoon, she returned to work with renewed energy. Every room she cleaned, every book she organized on the shelves, every conversation she overheard in the hallways, it all took on new meaning. She was no longer just a janitor observing a distant academic world. She was a wronged professor, about to reclaim her place. When she got home, she found Emily in the living room, surrounded by books scattered on the floor. "What are you doing, sweetheart?" "Researching classical literature. I want to better understand the field you worked in." Margaret approached and saw that Emily had borrowed several books from the school library on the subject. "Mom, look at this," Emily said, showing her an open book. "This professor, August Thompson, works at the university where you are now. He's very respected in the field." The name made Margaret shudder, but she tried to keep her expression neutral. "Oh?" "Yes. He's published several articles on the same themes you studied. What a coincidence, right?" "Coincidence," Margaret repeated, with a bitterness Emily didn't notice. "Mom, have you ever run into him in the university hallways?" "A few times," she answered evasively. "It must be strange seeing someone working in the same field you used to. Don't you feel like talking to him about it?" "Emily, I'm a janitor. Professors don't usually discuss academic matters with us." "But you could try. Maybe he could give you advice on how to get back into academia." Her daughter's naivety was both touching and painful. If Emily knew that August Thompson was the very person who had destroyed her mother's career, she'd be shocked. "Sweetheart, I'm going to take a shower. When I come back, we can talk more about this. In the bathroom, Margaret looked at herself in the mirror again. This time she saw something different. She was no longer just the tired janitor or the former professor. She was a woman who had endured immense trials and was ready to fight for justice. After her shower, she called Richard. "Richard, it's Professor Margaret. I've changed my mind. I want to speed up the process. I can't wait any longer." "Professor, what happened?" "Today I heard people praising August's stolen work as if it were genius, and my daughter is researching him, admiring a career built on lies. This has to stop." "I understand. Then let's move forward. Can you meet me tomorrow? I'll need you to sign some documents and give me the manuscripts you've kept." "I can, but this time I want it to be at your office. I won't hide in coffee shops anymore as if I were doing something wrong." "Perfect, Professor. I'll text you the address." "Richard, one last thing. How long do you think this process will take?" "If we're lucky, and the evidence is accepted quickly, maybe a few months." "Why do you ask?" "Because my daughter is about to graduate high school. She wants to study literature at the same university where I work. I can't let her enroll in an institution led by a fraud." "Professor, we'll do everything we can to resolve this before the end of the year." After hanging up, Margaret returned to the room where Emily was still studying. "Sweetheart, I need to tell you something important." "What is it, Mom?" "Remember when you mentioned Professor August Thompson today?" "Yes." "Well, there are some things about him you should know, and some things about me too." Margaret took a deep breath and began telling Emily the whole truth. She spoke about her academic career, the groundbreaking research she had developed, the plagiarism accusation, and her discovery that August Thompson had been behind it all. Emily listened silently, her eyes widening with each revelation. When Margaret finished, the teenager sat still for several minutes, processing everything. "Mom, this is unbelievable. How could someone do something like that? I'm still trying to understand it myself. Are you going to sue him?" "I'm going to try to seek justice, yes, but I want you to know this might cause some upheaval. There could be publicity, journalists, people talking about our family. Mom, I don't care about that. I care about justice being done. You can't let this man keep profiting from your work. So you support me?" "Of course I do. I'm proud of you for finally deciding to fight. And now I understand why you always knew so much about literature. You're not just my cleaning lady, Mum. You're my mum, the doctor of classical literature." The two embraced emotionally. For the first time in 15 years, Margaret felt whole again. She was no longer carrying the weight of the lie alone. The next morning, Margaret woke with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. She dressed more carefully than usual, and for the first time in 15 years carried a briefcase to work. "Mrs." Constance noticed the change immediately. "Margaret, you seem different today. Did something happen?" "Let's just say some things in my life are finally coming together, Mrs. Constance." "Well, I hope it's for the better. You've worked here so long. You deserve some happiness." Throughout the morning, Margaret performed her usual duties, but with extra focus. She noted the professors' schedules, listened to conversations, and memorized every detail that might help build her case. When lunchtime came, she took her briefcase and left the university. Richard's office was in downtown San Francisco, in a modern commercial building. Margaret had never imagined she'd step into a professional setting like that again. The receptionist greeted her politely and escorted her to Richard's office. The young lawyer was waiting with several documents neatly arranged on his desk. "Professor, did you bring the manuscripts?" "I did." She opened the briefcase and carefully pulled out a few yellowed pages. "It's not much, but these are the original notes from some of my most important research." Richard examined the documents closely. He could see Margaret's handwriting, the old dates, the corrections and additions made over time. "Perfect. This, along with the evidence we already have, should be enough to prove your original authorship. What do we do now?" "I'll file a formal complaint with the university's ethics committee. I'll also send copies to the district attorney's office and to education-focused media outlets." "What about August? Will he know it was me who reported him?" "Eventually, yes. But at this point, Professor, with the evidence we have, he won't be able to defend himself." Margaret signed the necessary documents and authorized Richard to act on her behalf. When she left the office, She felt both relieved and uneasy. There was no turning back now. Back at the university, she resumed her afternoon work, but her mind was fixed on what would come next. While cleaning the administrative hallway, she noticed unusual activity in the dean's office. Several people coming and going, hushed conversations, phones ringing constantly. Mrs. Constance approached her late in the afternoon. "Margaret, have you heard about the commotion in administration?" "What commotion?" "It seems a serious complaint came in against one of the professors. Everyone up there is very worked up." Margaret's heart raced. Richard had acted faster than she expected. "Do you know which professor?" "No, but from what I've heard in the rumors, it's someone important. Maybe even the dean." When she got home that night, Margaret told Emily about the day's developments. "Mom, do you think it'll work?" "I don't know, sweetheart, but at least I tried to do the right thing. And if it doesn't work, if they don't believe the evidence, then at least I'll have tried. And you'll know your mother didn't give up fighting for the truth." Emily hugged her mother tenderly. "Mom, no matter what happens, I love you and I'm proud of you." In the weeks that followed, the university became a cauldron of rumors and speculation. Margaret observed everything from her discreet position, professors whispering in the halls, administrators with worried expressions, journalists appearing on campus for investigations. Richard called regularly to keep her updated on the case's progress. The ethics committee had accepted the complaint and launched a formal investigation. August Thompson had been temporarily suspended while the case was reviewed. "Professor, there's something else I need to tell you," Richard said during one of their calls. "Other similar cases are coming to light. Professors who were wronged by Thompson in the past are speaking up." "How many?" "So far, 5. And all their stories are similar to yours." The news was both comforting and unsettling. Comforting because it proved she wasn't alone. Unsettling because it showed the extent of August's deceit. A month after the initial complaint, Margaret was cleaning the library when Mrs. Rose approached her with a strange look. "Margaret, can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course, Mrs. Rose." "You're not Professor Margaret Wilson, are you?" The direct question made Margaret freeze. She glanced around to see if anyone else was listening. "Why do you ask?" "Because when I heard about the scandal involving Professor Thompson, I started thinking. And you look so much like that professor who worked here years ago." Margaret realized there was no point lying anymore. Rose had always been sharp and observant. "Yes, it's me. My God, I knew it. I always had a strange feeling about you. The way you looked at the books, how you knew the library's layout better than any staff member." "Mrs. Rose, please don't tell anyone yet." "Of course not. But Margaret, were you the one who reported Thompson?" "I was." "So those accusations against you were really false?" "They were. And now we have the proof." Rose stepped closer and spoke quietly. "You know, I always doubted that story. Now it all makes sense. The way he suddenly came up with groundbreaking research right after you left. You noticed that back then?" "I did, and so did other long-time staff. But who would believe librarians and janitors against a PhD professor?" The conversation with Rose made Margaret realize there were more people willing to support her than she had imagined. It wasn't just her academic colleagues, but also the staff who had observed everything up close over all these years. 2 weeks later, Margaret was cleaning the faculty lounge when she overheard a conversation that made her stop working and listen. "Did you see the latest evidence that came out in the Thompson case?" said one professor. "I did. It's shocking. 15 years of systematic fraud," replied another. "And to think we praised his work, not knowing it was stolen. The worst part is that innocent people's careers were destroyed. That Professor Margaret Wilson, for example. She was brilliant." "Did you know her?" "I did. We worked together on a few projects. She was one of the best researchers this university ever had." "Where is she now?" "No one knows. After the scandal, she just disappeared." Margaret kept cleaning, but with tears in her eyes. It was moving to hear former colleagues speaking well of her work, even after so much time. That evening, Richard called with important news. "Professor, the board has decided. August Thompson has been stripped of all his positions. And there's more. The university wants to issue a public apology for the harm done to you and the other affected professors. What does that mean in practice? It means your name will be completely cleared, and the university is offering reinstatement with retroactive promotion. Margaret was silent for a few seconds, trying to process the information. Richard, this is unbelievable. After 15 years. There's more, Professor. The press wants to interview you, and several universities have already expressed interest in hiring you. When will this all be announced publicly? Next week. The university is holding an official press conference. After hanging up, Margaret called Emily and shared the news. The teenager screamed with joy and hugged her mother tightly. "Mom, you did it. The truth came out." "We did it, sweetheart, because you gave me the strength to fight." "And now? Are you going back to teaching?" "I don't know yet. It's a big decision. I need to think carefully." "But Mom, it's who you've always been. It's your calling." "Maybe you're right." The following week, the story broke in the national press. "University janitor was professor victimized by academic fraud" was the headline in several newspapers. The university organized a press conference where Margaret finally had the chance to tell her side of the story. Wearing a simple suit she had bought for the occasion, she stood before the cameras and microphones as Dr. Margaret Helen Wilson, specialist in classical literature. 15 years ago, my career and reputation were destroyed by false accusations," she said, her voice steady. "All this time I worked as a janitor at the very university that expelled me, waiting for the day the truth would come out." The journalist's questions were direct, and she answered honestly about the years of hardship, raising her daughter alone, and never losing hope that her innocence would be proven. "Dr. Wilson, do you plan to return to academic life?" asked one reporter. "I'm still weighing my options. 15 years have changed my perspective on many things." "What did you do during those years to keep your academic knowledge alive?" "I never stopped studying. I read everything I could during work breaks. And above all, I learned a lot about humility and the value of people regardless of their titles." After the press conference, Margaret was approached by dozens of former students, colleagues, and admirers who wanted to express their support and apologize for what had happened. Richard stayed by her side throughout the entire process and became not just her lawyer, but a true friend. "Professor, I want you to know it was an honor to help you. You are an example of resilience and dignity." "Thank you, Richard. Without your help, none of this would have been possible." A few weeks later, Margaret made her final decision. She called Emily for a serious talk. "Sweetheart, I've decided what I'm going to do." "What, Mom?" "I'm going to accept reinstatement at the university, but not just to return as the same professor I was before." "What do you mean?" "I want to create a special program, a project that provides educational opportunities for university staff who never had the chance to study. People like Mrs. Constance, Mrs. Rose, the security guards, the gardeners. That's an amazing idea, Mom. I want to use my experience to build bridges, to show that knowledge isn't a privilege for the few, but a right for everyone." "And can I help you?" "Of course. You can be my first research assistant." Months later, Margaret was back in the classroom, but in a very different way. Her project, Bridges of Knowledge, became a national model for educational inclusion. Cleaning staff, security, and maintenance workers attended literature, history, and language classes taught by volunteer professors. Mrs. Constance was one of the first students and proved to be a dedicated and talented learner. Mrs. Rose became the project's special assistant, using her decades of experience in the library to guide other staff members. During the official inauguration ceremony of the project, Margaret gave an emotional speech. "For 15 years, I've learned that a person's worth isn't in their title or social position, but in their dignity and character. This project is my way of giving back everything I've learned from you, who welcomed me when I needed it most." Emily, now a first-year literature student at the university, watched proudly from the auditorium. August Thompson was convicted of academic fraud and stripped of all his titles. Other professors harmed by him also had their names cleared and received reparations. Margaret's story became a symbol of resilience and perseverance. She wrote a book about her experience, which became a national bestseller, From Latin to Broom, A Journey of Fall and Resurrection. 2 years after The Truth came out, Margaret was in her new university office when she received a special call. "Professor Wilson, this is Mary Johnson, a janitor at San Francisco General Hospital. I saw your story on TV and wanted to talk to you." "Of course, Mary. How can I help you?" "Well, I have a secret too, Professor. I was a nurse 20 years ago, but I lost my license because of a false accusation. Do you think you could guide me on how to prove my innocence?" Margaret smiled, realizing her journey had inspired others to fight for justice. "Of course, Mary. Let's set up a meeting. And remember, the truth always finds a way to come out." At the end of the day, Margaret returned home and found Emily studying at the kitchen table, just like they had years before. But now everything was different. "How was your day at the university, Professor?" Emily teased. "It was wonderful, student. And yours?" "Great. Today we learned about Ovid's influence on contemporary American literature. The professor even cited one of your dissertations from 2009. "Really?" "Yes. She said it was groundbreaking work that opened new research paths in the field." Margaret was moved. After all this time, her work was finally being recognized and studied as it deserved. That night, before bed, she looked once more at the bathroom mirror. This time she saw exactly who she was, a woman who had endured immense trials, who had lost everything and rebuilt her life with dignity, who had transformed pain into wisdom and humiliation into strength. The janitor and the professor were not two different people. They were the same woman who had learned that true education doesn't come only from books, but from life lived with courage and integrity. Years later, when students asked how she had managed to overcome everything, Margaret always replied with a Latin phrase she had learned from Richard: "Veritas vos liberabit," "The truth shall set you free." And she had discovered that the truth wasn't just about proving her academic innocence, but about accepting every part of her journey. The brilliant professor, the humble janitor, the fighting mother, as equally valuable aspects of who she truly was. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this story of resilience and where you're watching from. If you have something to share with us, leave a sincere comment below. Do you believe Margaret made the right decision by fighting for the truth? We'd love to read your opinion. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to like the video and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other inspiring stories.